If they have funds for anything else, why can't they have funds for this?
Tonight, decades of protests and vigils, and the number of Indigenous women and girls murdered or missing is still rising.
For many Inuit parents who expected when Nunavut was going to be created that they were going to receive services in Inuktitut.
And how much Nunavut is investing to ensure there are enough Inuktitut speakers. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Melissa Ridgen. So often, Canadians are hit with news about another missing or murdered Indigenous woman or girl in this country. It's a tragedy where the numbers just keep rising.
But who keeps track of that growing number? Ashley Branson has more.
I miss her so much.
This is Betty Rourke. She's a family member who lost her daughter and her sister to murder and even lost extended family members to the tragedy. Rourke's daughter, Jennifer McPherson, was murdered in 2013, and her sister, Jennifer Johnson, was murdered in 1980. The true number of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is not known. Rourke believes RCMP should be responsible to keep track of data on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls.
They are the ones that are called immediately, and if they have funds for anything else, why can't they have funds for this?
In the early 2000s, the Native Women's Association had counted 300 missing and murdered Indigenous women. By 2004, that number grew to 500 over the past 2 decades. It was a number so high that governments and police challenged that tally. But that only made the voices grow louder.
Even -30 wind chills couldn't keep these women off Parliament Hill. It was the least they could do for their sisters, the approximately 500 Aboriginal women missing across Canada.
We use the term stolen sisters because it is this deliberate act of violence that they experience that we are fighting against. It's not some mysterious force, it's a deliberate act of violence against us.
But the doubts about the numbers all changed when the RCMP decided to look back in their records.
In 2014, the RCMP announced 1,181 missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada. The RCMP-led report stated there were just over 1,000 Indigenous women and girls who were homicide victims and around 160 missing.
We never lose sight of the fact that each and every statistic, each and every number is an Aboriginal woman, is an Aboriginal girl.
There's not a lot of tangible action in the report, in terms of how they're going to work with communities, how they're going to repair the relationship and the distrust that's been created.
This report is the first of its kind, spanned from 1980 to 2012. Now the report is close to 5 years old. The RCMP won't say if they will update the numbers of missing and murdered Indigenous women who are missing or have been murdered. In an email statement to APTN, the RCMP wrote, "The RCMP is not mandated nor funded to conduct statistical research of this kind. Corporal Caroline Duval, RCMP National Communications Services." The growing numbers of MMIWG has advocate Sheila North concerned.
We've been told by families and other advocates is that the number is probably either double or close to triple more than what the RCMP have released.
Saging First Nation in Manitoba is just one example. APTN News has previously reported how Saging is just one community reeling with many cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. The band says there are at least 17 cases. APTN has confirmed 20 cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls from Saging. And according to the RCMP, they count 1 case. When asked who's keeping track of all these cases, the Assembly of First Nations said they're not maintaining a database, nor is the Native Women's Association. The National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Women and Girls also said they don't have a definite number. Come next month, the inquiry will release their final report. Only then will we learn what their recommendations are to this growing problem.
I wish I could say I'm super optimistic, but I'm not. I'm going to be cautious, and I think that we're going to see much of the same information that's already out there.
Ashley Branson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Some local educators and business owners in Thunder Bay want to make the city a more welcoming place for Indigenous students. So they came up with a Wake the Giant. It's a new project that aims to do just that. Willow Fiddler brings us this.
Thunder Bay is known for its landmark, the Sleeping Giant, or MMIWG in Anishinaabe-Moan. It's also known for racism against Indigenous people. But there's a community of local educators and businesses hoping to change that.
The rest of Canada, all of Canada, thinks of Thunder Bay in that way. For our students, for their parents, they're scared to send their kids here. And for our students, they're scared to come here to begin with.
Greg Chomet has been a teacher at Dennis Franklin Cromartie High School for 11 years. He says First Nations students often experience racism in stores and businesses.
You know, an example would be that students have told me is being followed around, being suspected of shoplifting.
Chomet says those experiences, along with the negative media spotlight on the city in recent years, has taken its toll, and he wants to help give a voice to those who are ready for change.
And what the stickers represent is that any business, public space that has that is a safe place and an inviting place for Indigenous people, so that they know that they're welcome there.
More than 100 businesses and organizations have already signed up to participate in Wake the Giant, including this local business, On Galley Clothing Company.
I mean, we're born and raised in Thunder Bay, and we just feel it's time for change, and everyone should be welcome in our community.
On Galley Clothing Company is making the Wake the Giant t-shirts and donating the sales to the initiative. Grade 12 student Shonda Mamakwa from Kingfisher Lake First Nation says it's important to have the community come together.
They'll keep their parents that are in the community at ease, as there's a lot of things happening here in Thunder Bay, like racism and discrimination and such, and I think this will put their family at ease, that there's a lot of a support system.
Organizers say their goal is to have 150 businesses participate.
When they're walking down the street, if they see these logos lining the street in every store, they know that everybody there, everybody in those buildings, everybody there is wanting them here in the city. They're welcome, and it's about feeling that.
Willow Fiddler, APTN National News, Thunder Bay.
Under Jordan's principle, Canada currently only provides funding for status children. So who exactly are considered a First Nations child? That's what the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society is asking Canada. APTN's Amber Bernard was at today's tribunal hearing and spoke with Cindy Blackstock.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So there is a hearing today on what is a First Nations child and to define it. So what did the Caring Society propose?
Right, and it's only for eligibility for Jordan's principal services, nothing beyond that. What we really believe at the Caring Society is that First Nations should be the ones to determine who their citizens are. And Canada should not be imposing Indian Act definitions and restricting the number of children eligible. So what we're saying is really a three-phased approach. Number one is if there are children who do not have status, resident off reserve, who are recognized by their communities, then they should be eligible for Jordan's principle. And that recognition could take a variety of different forms. The other piece is that children of parents who have 6-2 status, when S3 comes in, it will recognize all those children as having status. We're saying, why wait? Why not give them the help now? And then the third thing we're recognizing is that there are people out there, through no fault of their own, who are separated by their communities due to residential schools, the 60 Scoop, and Canada's discriminatory provision of child welfare. We'd like to set up a process that assists communities in being able to reunify and identify those persons for the purposes of eligibility for Jordan's principle. We don't know what that process looks like. It's obviously going to take some consultation, but what we don't want is for persons who have already been horribly discriminated against by Canada to be discriminated against again because of an overly narrow interpretation of Jordan's principle.
So for our viewers, you're looking to expand eligibility under Jordan's principle for First Nations children. Can you explain right now what the process is to seek or to accessing that funding?
Right. So right now, anyone can make a report and a request for Jordan's principle by calling 1-855-JP-CHILD. The problem is that Canada has restricted off-reserve to only children who have got status and eligible to status, but we're hoping to change that here. I should say there's an interim order already on the book, so if you are a parent or you know of a non-status First Nations child who's recognized by their community, who has urgent needs, life-saving issues, or they'll suffer some harm if they don't get help, then those children are eligible. Canada has to provide services to those kids so that they don't fall between the cracks because of Canada's Indian Act.
So right now Canada is, from what I understood, is seeking to proceed as normal, and some were saying that this is more of an administrative convenience for them as opposed to really caring about the children.
Yeah, like it's a colonial thing. Like they without consultation with First Nations, have imposed the Indian Act, both at the very beginning and now in this definition of First Nations children off reserve. They didn't talk to anybody when they decided they're going to impose the Indian Act. They just did it. And when they did it, they didn't give due consideration to the children and their needs, nor did they give due consideration to the self-determination rights of First Nations to determine who is and who is not their citizen.
Also, Canada and the AFN had said there were some financial strains they were concerned about by adopting this proposed First Nations child definition. Can you speak to that?
Right. We haven't seen any material evidence that says that Canada can't afford to treat First Nations children equally. And my view is if they can afford to renovate Parliament for 15 years, they can certainly afford to make sure that children who are First Nations and recognized by their community get the help and support they deserve.
And do you have any last comments you would like to make?
No, other than thank you to Jordan's family. You know, every time a child benefits by Jordan's principle, I give honor to Jordan. And we wanted to bring him into the room today to remind people that this isn't just some policy. This is a principle birthed by Jordan's spirit as a legacy of equality. And for anyone in that room to twist it into a place where it's discriminatory against a child who leaves a child out, I think that's wrong.
Cindy's always fighting so hard for the kids out there.
Always. She never stops.
Time for a quick break.
When we come back, we're going to have some highlights from today's In Focus looking at crime and justice reform. And here's a look at tomorrow's weather.
Coming up on APTN National News, Caroline Monet talks about her work and her upcoming exhibition at the New York Whitney Museum. And we speak with Sky Opinka, curator of the exhibition's film program.
First had seen her moving image work. I had seen Mobilize at the Sundance Film Festival in 2015, and I was just blown away by it. I thought it was a really concise, tight, smart work that's commented on so many different aspects of being an Indigenous person, not only in Canada but the U.S., and just like what it means to inhabit these different landscapes.
Starting on the East Coast, sunny and +4 for Halifax, 8 above in Fredericton. 0 with snow for Nain, snow and +1 for Happy Valley, Goose Bay. Rain and +6 for Quebec City and Saguenay. Rain and 7 for Toronto and Ottawa, 8 above with showers in North Bay. Snow on the way for Thunder Bay with a high of +4, -2, and snow in Sioux Lookout. -15 under sunny skies for Churchill, 3 below with snow for Puckatawagan. +1 with the chance of showers in Winnipeg, +4 in Brandon. Over to Saskatchewan, sunny skies and 5 above in North Battleford, Saskatoon, and Regina. +7 in Meadow Lake, 0 with snow in Uranium City.
Welcome back. New language training program in Nunavut is receiving millions from the territory's land claim group. Nunavut Tungavik and the government of Nunavut have been at odds over how to support the Inuit language. Ken Driscoll has more from Iqaluit.
Nunavut Tungavik, they're the group that represents Nunavut Inuit, has committed to funding an Iqaluit-based language program to the tune of $5.4 million over the next 3 years. The goal? To teach people to teach Inuktitut. They're going to train some trainers.
the train the trainer component of what we are going to be embarking on is training Inuit instructors to train Inuktitut first language speakers and to train Inuit in Inuktitut second language courses, training.
Imagine calling the police and not being able to understand them, or visiting a doctor and the same happens. That is reality for Inuktitut speakers in Nunavut.
Whether it be in the health services, whether it be in justice services, whether it be in the education system, are unable to receive services that they, I would say, require as a basic human right, and they're unable to receive them in an Inuit language.
Nunavut turns 20 on Monday. Despite the lofty goals of Inuktitut being the working language of the government of Nunavut, that hasn't happened.
Unfortunately, the resources that are required to ensure that this is realized has not been placed, even though the words have been stated.
This is why Nunavut Tungavik is putting money into training. Use of Inuktitut declines by 1% a year, when the original plan for Nunavut would have moved the needle in the opposite direction.
For many Inuit parents who expected when Nunavut was going to be created that they were going to receive services in Inuktitut, and that the programs and services would be developed in a way and designed in a way that would reflect Inuit culture and understanding and ways of being.
Language was one of the reasons Nunavut was founded, but the progress Inuit expected hasn't happened, so NTI is trying to fill the gap. More trainers will help teach Inuktitut to more people, but whether it can reverse 20 years of government inertia on language remains to be seen. Kent Driscoll, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
It's not news that Indigenous people are overrepresented in prisons and also as victims of crime. On today's In Focus, we discussed why we're trapped in a system that doesn't work and how to get out of it. Here's some highlights.
If you use 1/5 of that money to say, and we'll use Northern Ontario as an example. Say a young fella from outside of Kenora comes in from up north, goes to school, gets arrested, and then eventually finds himself before the courts. And if you could provide a system at 1/4 of the cost or 1/5 of the cost of remanding him so that he would not get in trouble again, and buy into it as an individual, and with the help of his family or his First Nation or the local justice center, it's not a hard sell.
Yeah.
You know, it's because a lot of the justice system, unfortunately, is an industry, right?
Yeah.
And it's been an industry for years. I was part of it. I arrested a lot of people and put them through that system. You know, and you had that feeling of justice when you did it, especially when you dealt with victims.
Yeah.
You think, yeah, I just helped the victim of this crime.
Yeah.
But at the same token, was I creating more victims down the road? And so I think the most effective kind of justice reform is to make it an economic case for keeping people out of the system, and literally taking 1/5 of the money we spend on incarceration and remand into providing outs for people.
You know, for me, I look at it from the perspective of the over-representation, us becoming commoditized. We're commodities.
Absolutely.
Because we're there, we're providing job opportunities for others. That's why I pointed out that of 114 or 120 employees, there's only one Aboriginal. That's 2 years ago. I don't know what the number is now, but so that's one of the problems. We become commodities. We make money for others. You know, not only in the justice system, but child welfare.
I would say foster system
and health-wise, we're overrepresented in many different areas.
Another important topic for In Focus. Well, Indigenous artists in Quebec is heading to the Big Apple to be featured in a prestigious exhibit. We'll tell you about that after the break.
And here's tomorrow's weather.
Picking back up in northern Alberta, +7 for high level, 8 above in Fort McMurray, 10 under sunny skies in Medicine Hat, +8 for Edmonton, sunny and 13 for Campbell River and Vancouver, showers for Victoria, +9 in Dease Lake, +13 for Prince Rupert, +2 for Old Crow and Rock River. 9 above under sunny skies for Whitehorse. 0 in Yellowknife. +7 and rain for Norman Wells. -9 with snow for Sax Harbor. 0 in Nunavut and Colville Lake. 23 below for Whale Cove and Chesterfield. -22 in Baker Lake. -17 in Clyde River. -24 in Resolute. Welcome back. An artist whose work has been shown around the globe is one of just 2 Canadians selected for an upcoming show. Our Sophie Claude Miller met up with Caroline Monet and the person who selected her work for New York City's Whitney Museum of American Art.
At 34 years old, Algonquin French and self-taught multidisciplinary artist Caroline Monet's work has already been programmed in exhibitions and festivals all around the world. The Cannes Film Festival, Sundance, the Quebec Museum of Fine Arts, the National Art Gallery, and the Museum of Contemporary Arts of Montreal, to name a few. We met her in her studio where she was working on future creations. Monet enjoys working with various mediums, but she says it herself, video are her first love.
Multidisciplinary practice. So I work as well in cinema as visual arts and sculpture and painting. So for the Whitney, I'll be presenting videos, which is kind of my first love. In art, I started making films back in 2009. So they're showing 3 videos of mine over the time of the exhibition.
Monet comes from different backgrounds, French and Algonquin, and has studied sociology in university. It's easy to perceive it in all her work.
It's a reflection of where I'm at as an individual and as an artist. And I also think colors might make it more accessible. I don't want to be too serious and sometimes in the things that I'm dealing with. Maybe the topic is very heavy and has a lot of things to it, but then with color it makes it a little bit more accessible, a little bit more fun, and then it allows it to, when you use humor, I think you can talk about a lot of things.
Sky Opinka, also a movie director, selected Caroline Monet's work for the Biennale exhibition, and he had met her at the Sundance Festival in 2015.
And I'd seen her earlier work, some of her recent work, and there's always this attention to detail and care which I'm really drawn to, and which complements all these other different works that I've been thinking about, especially as far as what it means to be an Indigenous experimental filmmaker.
They're important videos for me because they have a lot of energy in the video, and I think that's where we're at right now. We want to put positive images in the world. We want to break away from preconceptions. So it's really interesting to put images of Indigenous people on screen.
The Whitney Museum of American Art's Biennale exhibition will be presented from May 17 to September 22nd in New York City. Sophie Claude Miller, APTN National News, Montreal.
That is quite an accomplishment. Congrats to Caroline. That's your APTN National News for this Wednesday. For much more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca.
You can check out In Focus there as well. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Melissa Ridgen.
And I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.